Rome believed itself untouchable. Its legions were disciplined, its empire relentless, and its people unshaken. Every enemy who rose against it was crushed, until one man appeared. A man who marched an army across the frozen Alps, brought war elephants thundering into Italy, and destroyed Roman armies in battles that are still studied over 2,000 years later. He wasn't just a general. He was Rome's living nightmare. This is the story of Hannibal Barca, the man who terrified the greatest empire the world had ever seen. Hannibal's destiny was written before he could speak of war. As a boy, his father Hannibal Barca, commander of Carthage, led him to an altar and demanded an oath: never be a friend to Rome. This wasn't symbolic. It was an initiation, a baptism into vengeance. Rome had humiliated Carthage in the First Punic War, stripped its power, and crushed its pride. Hannibal's life would become the answer. From that moment, his identity was bound to Rome's destruction. Where others studied war for power or glory, Hannibal studied war for revenge. Hannibal grew under the shadow of soldiers and campaigns. He learned endurance by living in the field. He studied strategy by watching battles unfold. He mastered the art of leading men, not through speeches, but through shared suffering. His soldiers loved him because he ate what they ate, endured what they endured, and risked what they risked. He wasn't a commander above them. He was a commander among them. This loyalty would become the foundation for his greatest gamble, an invasion of Rome itself. In 218 BC, Hannibal began his march. He didn't attack from the sea. Rome expected that. Instead, he chose the impossible route, across the towering Alps. The journey was a crucible. Snowstorms buried men alive. Avalanches swept soldiers off cliffs. Starvation hollowed the ranks. And yet Hannibal pushed forward, never breaking. He brought with him war elephants, not just beasts of burden, but living symbols of terror. Their presence alone made his army feel otherworldly, like a force summoned from nightmare. When Hannibal finally descended into Italy, he had lost half his army, yet he had achieved the impossible. He had turned geography itself into a weapon. Rome was shocked. The war was no longer at its borders. It was in its heartland. Hannibal understood something most generals never grasped. To defeat Rome, he could not simply fight battles. He had to break Rome's spirit. At the river Trebia, he lured the Romans into a trap, striking from hidden positions. At Lake Trasimene, he ambushed them in the mist, killing thousands before they could even draw formation. But it was at Cannae where his genius reached its peak. Facing a Roman army twice his size, Hannibal deliberately weakened his center, allowing Rome to press forward. Then his cavalry closed in from the sides. Rome was encircled, trapped. In one day, 50,000 Romans died, the blood of an empire drowned in the dust. It became one of the most devastating defeats in military history. Rome, the conqueror of nations, had been humiliated. Cannae was more than a battle. It was psychological warfare. News of the massacre spread like fire. Panic gripped the Roman people. Allies began to waver. Even Rome's senators feared their city might fall. Children were told bedtime warnings. Hannibal is at the gates. It wasn't just a phrase. It was a living fear, a shadow over every Roman's mind. Hannibal had transformed himself into a myth, a figure larger than life, an invader who seemed unstoppable. This was his greatest weapon, fear that lingered even when he wasn't present. But Rome did not collapse. Terrified, yes. Shaken, yes. But not broken. Rome chose a new strategy. refusal. They would no longer meet Hannibal in pitched battles. They would starve him of victory, grind him down slowly. This was the Fabian strategy, a war of patience, attrition, and endurance. Rome's power was not only in its legions, it was in its will. And slowly, as years dragged on, Hannibal found himself trapped in a war he could not finish. The greatest tragedy of Hannibal's campaign was not Rome's resilience, but Carthage's weakness. Hannibal waited for reinforcements that never came. Carthage's politicians, jealous of his success, refused to send the aid he needed to finish the war. He had marched across mountains, destroyed armies, and terrified an empire. Yet his own city left him isolated. Hannibal was the sharpest blade in the ancient world, but a blade cannot cut without the hand that wields it. Rome eventually turned the war back on Carthage. Scipio Africanus, a rising Roman general, studied Hannibal's tactics and learned from them. He took the fight to Africa, forcing Hannibal to return home. At the Battle of Zama, Hannibal faced his mirror, a general who had mastered his own style. Rome triumphed. Carthage was broken. Hannibal lived on, but as a hunted man. Rome chased him across kingdoms until, cornered, he chose poison over chains. Even in death, he denied Rome the satisfaction of capture. Hannibal never conquered Rome. But perhaps conquest was never the true measure of his power. He had forced Rome to adapt, forced its people to reshape their identity, and carved fear so deeply into their memory that centuries later they still spoke his name with dread. Hannibal's story proves a dark truth about power. To rule men, you do not always need to defeat them. Sometimes it is enough to haunt them. This is why Hannibal remains immortal, not only as a general of war, but as the master of psychological terror.